In this series, I explore an old, seemingly abandoned, retrofuturistic space nation. Join me as I work my way from the rural countryside, through industrial complexes, military bases, all the way into the city centre of a megacity, where I had an encounter that will never make me the same again. This is the first part out of 6. In this episode, I roam an industrial wasteland filled with a curious mix of old and strangely futuristic buildings. Follow along as I go deeper and deeper into the story behind the mysteriously abandoned space nation of X2A7. In front of me there was a worn-down industrial complex. As I wandered around to get a feeling for the surroundings, some of the architecture felt a bit off. It was quite futuristic, but the materials were traditional, at least compared to my reality. The fog was so dense that I could hardly see more than 20 yards in front of me. The cold moist went straight to the core of my bones. I only had a thin summer jacket and cargo pants. For every length of a building I walked, the fog revealed new buildings in a similar mixed style, all marked by rust and other decay. I looked through the windows and most of them were what looked like empty warehouses. Some were office space, and some were communal areas like canteens. But no food, unfortunately. It was too early to say if this was just an abandoned area or if it was bigger than that. After some hours, I finally made it out of the industrial complex and started walking along an asphalt road. It was paved by dense forest, so I couldn't really get a grip of my bearings and surroundings. Some miles in, a swampy meadow opened up on the left-hand side of the road, and what I saw grabbed my attention. It was filled with what looked like some sort of solar panels. Hard to tell if they were functional, but they were all connected. My throat was so dry from all the walking that I decided to push further into the swampy forest to see if it led to a lake or stream nearby. I was not going to revert to licking condensation of solar panels, at least not yet. Although I've done a lot worse on my travels in order to survive, there's no need to become a desperate savage this early on. Following the swamp turned out to be a lucky strike, but not in the way I anticipated. Just a few steps in, a small path opened up and led straight towards a glass dome. It bore resemblance of those fancy dome retreats back home that people would pay big quids for living in, until they realise how pampered they really are and how out of touch with nature humans really have become. I guess that for most people, nature retreats functions as a reminder of how fortunate we are, and for a brief moment in time, it makes us appreciate what we have. I circled around and found dozens of domes in varying size. I peeked through the dirty glass panels. There were all types of domes ranging from what looked like hydroponic farms and labs to offices, kitchens and living quarters. Really remarkable. It's always a special and eerie feeling walking around abandoned places like this. The silence is so intense and it is almost as if you can feel a faint leftover energy from the people that used to inhabit these places. You're always on alert and at the same time quite relaxed. It's a strange mix. I didn't strike any luck with water, so I had to place all the glasses and pans I could find outside and pray for rain. At least I had found my shelter for the night, worthy a 5-star rating on the abandoned building scale. A 3-bed dome inside another dome. Quite peculiar. I managed to doze off for some hours during the night. The harsh cold didn't allow me to sleep for more than an hour at a time before I had to go up and do some jumping jacks. I also learnt that I wasn't alone. It started off with faint dull sounds, then evolved into shadow play on the outer dome walls with the help of the moon. I recognised it as being something similar to our family of cervidae, so some kind of deer, caribou or something else in that category. Some fuzzy warming rays of sunlight managed to break through the dense fog early in the morning, and that rusty cup of cold rain mixed with dew and little critters swimming around in it tasted like the finest spring water after being thirsty for such a long time. I spent some time in the early morning light searching for signs of electricity, No luck with neither light switches nor computers. They all had that 60s vibe going, and I didn't expect them to have lived through all the condensation over the years. Judging from the decay of metals and how overgrown some man-made structures were, I estimated that this place must have been abandoned for at least 20 years, but probably for longer. It's always tricky estimating because the climate plays a vital role, as well as construction quality and for how long heating has been out of the picture. Active water systems and broken pipes can also wreak havoc early on. Give it enough time and water can really find its way through almost anything. I made a makeshift hobo bundle out of a blanket and a metal pipe, filled it with 2 large flasks of water and some blankets, in case I wasn't as lucky finding another 5-star dome retreat when being zonked. I'm not a huge fan of heights, but if it can save me time wandering around aimlessly, I'll defy the vertigo. I climbed a comms mast about halfway and hoped to get a better view, and maybe get above the stubborn fog that wrapped everything in a milky white blanket. One thing is sure, they sure like their domes. All around they were spread out in clusters in forest holts, but beyond one of the clusters, I could see the contours of a not-too-distant skyline appear through the fog. I set course towards the skyline, pushing through shrubbery and boggy areas. It took much longer than I anticipated, but finally I pushed through the last piece of wet thicket. In front of me towered 3 tall mushroom-like buildings and a 1-story building hovering on large concrete pillars above a small ravine with water flowing through it at the bottom. I followed the stream and luckily ended up at a bridge after not too long. I walked the overgrown streets on the hunt for stores and maybe, if I was lucky, a supermarket. But it was all just a weird mix of residential buildings shuffled up with some mushroom structures and the occasional dome. This seemed more like an industrial suburb, and when I climbed the stairs of a 14-story building, I got my suspicions confirmed. The area was only a few blocks large, but something on the outskirts of it caught my attention. It looked like a military airbase. I sighed to myself, even more hiking to do, but at least it bore the potential promise of some leftover rations.